Okay. Oh, gee, that's too loud. I will just give you a couple of, if you look at your, the thing we passed out, the first slide talks about, the League of Women Voters and what we do, but I'm going to skip quite down to the one that says Quick Facts, California Budget. If you see the 2016-17 budget, in the general fund, there's $122 billion, and designated funds, special funds that are restricted in how they're to be used, is a mere $45 billion. The next slide is Quick Facts K through 12. The 2016-17 budget provides $71 billion for education funding in California. 1988, we passed Proposition 98, which said that any general fund monies must, 43%, I think it is that right, Dennis? Must go to education in California, to the schools, not for buildings and grounds, but for education, for instruction, for curriculum, for whatever, however they're going to use it. And you'll notice as we go through some of these pros and cons, some of them specifically reference Prop 98 and say, this is excluded from 98, all the money that is generated from whatever this proposition is, none of it goes to education. And that's not a good or a bad thing, that's just a thing that you should keep in mind as you go along. And, oh, wait, I already said all that. Then the next one, Quick Facts, Medi-Cal. A lot of the propositions also deal with Medi-Cal funding. So Medi-Cal provides care for 13 million Californians, which is a third of our residents. And it costs about $95 billion a year, of which $23 billion comes from the general fund. And as we go through the propositions, you'll see where it's proposed that, or where already money comes from other than the general fund, because many of the costs are shared between the California government and the federal government. We're ready. Prop 51 is school bond funding for K through 12 schools and community colleges. It's an initiative statute. Currently, $40 billion in bonds were issued between 1998 and 2006, and that $40 billion has all been spent. The funding in this bond, should it pass, is for land, construction, and renovating, not for instruction or materials. It's just for the building grounds themselves. And schools that apply for funding from these bonds must have 40 to 50% of the funding already in place locally. If Prop 51 passes, the state would be authorized to sell $9 billion in general obligation bonds, which are ones that are paid from the state budget. $6 billion would be to modernize or construct K through 12 public school facilities. $2 billion would be for community college facilities. $1 billion would be for charter schools and vocational facilities, and the bonds would be paid back at about $500 million a year for about 35 years, and that would come up to $8.6 billion in interest. The Legislative Analyst's Office provides, if you see in the material you get from the state and from the county, the Legislative Analyst's Office provides nonpartisan fiscal and policy advice to the legislature. And one of its roles is to evaluate the fiscal impact of ballot propositions. And about Prop 51, the Legislative Analyst says, there are $85 billion in general fund-supported infrastructure bonds still outstanding. And on that, $7 billion a year is bond service interest from the general fund. And there are $31 billion in bonds to be sold. The yes arguments for Prop 51. It will fix deteriorating schools, upgrade classrooms, and provide job training facilities for veterans and vocational education. The no people say the state should not add more debt. And one of the things, this is something that Governor Brown is opposed to, and he says that the needed reforms of bond money distribution formulas are not included in Prop 51. So schools are not equally able to apply, according to that argument. The yes funding, as you can see, comes from school or building-related groups, and there are no major funding against this proposition.
That's correct. $31 billion has been authorized but not yet sold because these other bonds are dedicated to other activities, such as roads and building more prisons and things like that.
So that isn't $31 billion school bond?
No, in the last, what was it, 20 years, there's been $40 million worth of school bonds sold. Okay. See, Marilyn and I have given this, all of the propositions twice, and we've not been able to get it under 70 minutes. So we're going to try to do that. What's going to happen at 1:30, which is our usual stopping time, is we're going to take a break wherever we are. And people who need to go, please go. And if you want to stay to the bitter end, you can. I will like to point out that AAUW and the Junior League all stayed to the last proposition. Only the retirement homes wanted to cut it off at 45 minutes. Okay. Prop 52. This one was the one that I had, it seemed the most obscure as to why is there a private hospital fee. It turns out that it is in lots of people's self-interest. Currently, the federal government has matching funds available to help support Medi-Cal. Again, that's the health program for low-income Californians, and they offer up to $4.4 billion to do that. The private hospitals got together and they put a fee, they didn't want to call it a tax, but a fee on themselves to raise about $4.6 billion, and that money is used as the matching. The federal government accepts that. Now, this is not being done out of the goodness of the private hospitals' hearts, because they do get something out of it, that essentially all the money gets redistributed to public and private hospitals when they treat Medi-Cal patients. So if they treat a reasonable number of Medi-Cal patients, they basically get their fee back, plus they'll know that this matching money is also available. Now, the reason they were concerned about this was that in previous years, the matching money came out of the general fund, and the legislature sometimes wouldn't allocate the full amount. So that's why the private hospitals got together and decided to do this. Now, it's permissible through legislation, and the legislature has extended this program 3 times, and the next renewal comes up in 2018. We also should note that the fee is exempt from Prop 98. In other words, it doesn't go into the general fund, but it goes completely to this matching fund. Next. What Prop 52 would do is private hospitals, of course, want to make the fee permanent, so it does not need to be renewed by a vote of the legislature. The legislature cannot divert money from this fee. This actually happened in 2011 when the state was in budget crisis, and the legislature took some of this fee money and put it into the general fund. And the Prop 98 exemption will continue. Next. The yes people say that it guarantees the money for the federal matching, and it prevents the fee diversion. Next. The no people, when Marilyn and I went through and we looked for the yes and no arguments, we didn't copy them from the voter handbook or anything like that. We actually from our point of view, looked for the strongest arguments, both for and against. And so this was the best I could find, is that someone is arguing that the legislature should have some say in the use of the fund because as how healthcare is paid for evolves, we want to remain flexible in this. The yes funding comes from a lot of private hospitals, and the no funding, very curious. If you love California politics, you always enjoy these things. SEIU, the Service Employees Union International, very active politically, put in $12 million to oppose this. And then a little while later, they declared that they're going to become neutral on this, and they're going to get about $9 million of this dollars back. Who knows what was going on in the back rooms. Okay. Any questions on 53 for clarification? Okay, thank you. Oops.
He meant 52. I don't see any hands. Okay. Proposition 53 is a vote on revenue bonds. Currently, California funds many infrastructure projects with bonds. And there are two types of bonds: general obligation bonds, which are paid back by the general fund, and to issue them, it requires statewide voter approval. Then there are revenue bonds, which are paid back by the users of the projects, the bridges, the tunnels, the whatevers, and they do not require voter approval. Next, if Proposition 53 passes, statewide voter approval would be required before revenue bonds could be issued for projects costing over $2 billion. Dividing large projects into several smaller ones would be prohibited to avoid a Prop 53 statewide vote, and the $2 billion would be adjusted every year for inflation. Next, there are very few projects that cost over $2 billion. There are two that do. One is the Water Fix project, which is the 2 water tunnels under the Delta, and the other one is the high-speed rail project. The legislative analyst says the financial impact of passing this proposition is subject to considerable uncertainty because the proposition does not define project. The courts may have to decide. The yes argument is that the voters would have a say on big projects regardless of how the bonds are paid back. The no arguments: the proposition is written so broadly it could give state voters veto power over purely local projects, and it could slow down the infrastructure projects. The yes funding, $5.6 million, comes from Dean and Joan Cortopassi. They are a San Joaquin Valley farming couple or entrepreneurs, or however you want to define it, that are basically against high-speed rail and tunnels under the water. The no funding comes from the California Democratic Party and then from a couple of unions, and you may recall that these projects are both things that Governor Brown is for. Any questions? Dennis.
Okay, 54 has a generic term, legislative procedures, but I like to call it the 72-hour notice and video ubiquitous proposition. Currently, legislative sessions are open to the public. Most sessions are video recorded, and the video that is recorded you cannot use for political or commercial purposes. If 54 passes, then bills that are going to be voted on in the Assembly and State Senate have to be posted 72 hours in advance on the internet and in print. All of the open sessions will be video recorded, and the video can be used for what they call any legitimate purpose, which means it could be used in a political ad or for commercial uses. The yes people say that the 72-hour notice will enable all legislators and the public to be informed. This is not an unusual requirement in that cities and counties, for example, have to post their agendas 72 hours in advance. The no people say that this slows down legislation and it will be more difficult to handle bill changes at the end of a session. The yes funding, this is one of these initiatives that one guy thought of, funded, and here we are. So if you follow California politics, especially the initiative process, Charlie Munger's name's very familiar. He is the son of Charles Munger Sr., who is Warren Buffett's right-hand man. So that's where all the family play money came from. He put in $9 million, and that also does not count what is usually another $3 million to pay for the signature gatherers to put the item on the ballot. There are no major funders against this. Major meaning they've thrown in, say, $100,000. The way that the funding works for propositions is that if you want to oppose or be in favor of a proposition, you have to register a campaign committee with the Secretary of State, and then you can contribute to that campaign committee. So that's where these numbers come from. Okay, any questions for clarification? Okay, this is such a sophisticated group. We're really rolling along.
Proposition 55 is an initiative constitutional amendment for a tax extension to fund education and health care. Currently, in 2012, 4 years ago, Proposition 30 was passed, and it added state income tax rates of 1% to 3% on California income tax rates for high-income people, $263,000 for individuals or $563,000 for couples. The income tax will expire in 2018. Prop 30 also increased the sales tax a quarter cent through this year, 2016. If Proposition 55 passes, the 2012 tax rate increases on high income taxpayers would be extended another 12 years until 2030. But the sales tax, the quarter cent increase will not be extended, but will expire as planned this year. The legislative analyst, he says, depending on economic conditions, Prop 55 raises between $4 billion and $9 billion a year. The yes arguments, it does not increase taxes, but it extends the increased rate, the one that was approved in 2012, for the higher income earners. And it prevents general fund cuts to public schools and health care because those high income earners would still be paying the higher taxes. No arguments. Prop 30 in 2012 was promised to be temporary to meet a budget crisis. Today's state budget is balanced. And the California tax structure is also too dependent on volatile income tax. Other revenue sources need to be found. The yes funding comes, as you can see, from hospitals, healthcare, teachers, employees, union, and there's no major funding against this one. Any questions?
Okay, Prop 56, the tobacco excise tax. The difference between excise tax and a sales tax is a sales tax you pay at the retail point, and it covers basically all the things that you're buying, except those things exempt. The excise tax is levied on a specific product, and you may never see it delineated because it is often put on the wholesalers who pass the tax on to the consumer. Currently, California cigarette excise tax, this is in addition to the sales tax, but the excise tax is 87 cents per pack. This puts California 37th in the nation. The leader, of course, is New York State, which is, I think, $4.35, which is why there's so much cigarette smuggling in New York State. The excise tax, again, everybody loves to exempt their own projects from Prop 98. The excise tax has been in the past exempt, so it does not go into the general fund, and it doesn't get split into health care and education. Next. Okay, if it passes, the excise tax is going to be raised $2 per pack, which would be $2.87, which will vault California to 9th in the nation. The excise tax will also be applied in proportionate amounts to e-cigarette and other nicotine products, and the Prop 98 exemption will continue. Since it's a specified tax and it's not going into the general fund, of the $300 to $600 million that will be raised initially, 120 million is designated mainly to higher education, and then the remainder, 83% goes to Medi-Cal. 13% will go to anti-smoking programs, and 4% will go to UC for research into the hazards of tobacco. The yes people say that higher cost will reduce cigarette use. This is actually the ultimate goal of this proposition, not to raise excise tax money, but to try to drive smoking to zero. The tax will contribute to Medi-Cal and anti-smoking programs, both worthwhile. The no people say that while healthcare does get money from the excise tax, so should education. So they feel that the money should go into the general fund and not be exempt from Prop 98. And also the anti-smoking programs should receive more than 13% of the excise tax money. Next, the yes funders, hospitals, service employees. Whoops.
Wait till the end.
Oh, once we get on a roll, we go into another zone here. The yes funding is the Association of California Hospitals. Tom Steyer, in fact, I just noticed he's got ads on TV where he actually appears. He's another guy who likes to put in a couple of million here and there for different initiatives. He put in $4 million to this, and the SEIU people put in $2 million. The no funding basically comes from the cigarette companies. Okay, questions? Yes?
That higher cost reduces cigarette.
You know, that's very interesting. That's the third time that question has come up, whether higher costs of cigarettes will reduce consumption. The people who are for this point to some situation that occurred in Australia and in another large-scale situation where the price was drastically raised and the the consumption went down. The people opposed to this say, no, those are special situations, and let's see, Jim Emery could tell me whether this is elastic or inelastic, but no matter how much you charge, people are going to buy cigarettes. That's the other approach. Inelastic, thank you very much. There's another question.
Back in the slide, distribution excise tax. The second item, $120 million is designated, and you said for higher education. So how do no people saying that while healthcare gets excise money, so should education?
So the question is, although money appears for higher education in the allocation of the excise tax, why do the opponents of this say that education is not getting any funding? What they're saying is that K-12 is not getting any funding. Okay.
This goes to law enforcement too, remember?
Oh, yeah. Okay, Beverly.
Follow up on that clarification. The $120 million designated, therefore is designated for higher education, not K-12?
That's correct, yes. Yeah. One thing that happens with these excise tax, since you can designate them, lots of people want to be designatees. All sorts of people getting cigarette money. Okay. Anything else? Okay, Marilyn.
Proposition 57 deals with criminal sentences, parole, juvenile criminal proceedings, and sentencing. Currently, a federal court has ordered California to reduce the prison population to only 137.5% of capacity. The number of prisoners did drop after Prop 47 was passed because their sentences were reduced for certain nonviolent felonies. They were reduced to misdemeanors. Youths now between 14 and 18 accused of murder with special circumstances, such as torture, are automatically tried as adults. For youth with significant criminal histories or crimes listed by For youth with significant criminal history or crimes listed by statute, the prosecutor has the option of trying the case in court, in adult court, the prosecutor. If Proposition 57 passes, that will change. It would, at a hearing, a juvenile court judge would determine if youth should be tried as adults, where there's discretion, the court judge, not the DA. It would allow parole consideration for those convicted of nonviolent crimes who have served minimum sentences and who have passed screening for public safety. And that would be such things as education, enrollment, drug treatment, good behavior. For example, a maximum 6-year sentence for burglary might increase to 17 years if the defendant has served prison time for a previous burglary, or to 25 years to life under the 3 strikes law if the first 2 convictions were for serious or violent crime. Since California law does not consider burglary a violent crime, Prop 57 would make the burglar eligible for parole after 6 years. And according to the Chronicle, about 30,000 of California's 129,000 state prisoners are serving time for nonviolent crime. About 7,500 would be eligible for parole each year. The yes arguments, it encourages inmates to take advantage of educational and rehabilitation opportunities. Presently, they have no incentive to do that. It would reduce overcrowding in state prisons, and with or without Prop 57, inmates are eventually released back into the community. The no people say it releases a greater number of convicted felons onto the street, and it would weaken crime laws such as this 3 strikes crime law. And one DA said the governor is more concerned about prison overcrowding than public safety. The yes funding, as you can see, most of it comes from Governor Brown and the Democratic Party, and Reed Hastings from Netflix, The no funding, moderate amount, comes from law enforcement district attorneys. Any questions?
Does it really release more felons? I thought it was about misdemeanors.
No. No, some felony charges have been reduced to misdemeanors. But now this is just for people who are convicted of felonies, but we need to reduce our prison population, so this is an attempt to find ways to do that.
But it's just nonviolent.
Yes, but the question is how you define nonviolent.
Prop 58, English proficiency. In 1998, the voters passed Prop 227, which mandated, instead of bilingual education, an English-only immersion for students who needed to learn English sufficiently that they could go into mainstream classes. Currently, 1 out of every 5 K-12 students is classified as an English learner. If Prop 58 passes, the mandatory English immersion requirement will be repealed. Schools may offer different programs, and the school districts are required to meet with the community about how to teach English learners. The Yes people say that we should teach English learners by the most effective method. We've learned things since 1998, and that by having more bilingual programs, it would enable English speakers to have the opportunity to go into a bilingual program. The No people say that English immersion was a response to a critical problem in 1998, that it has been a success, that test scores demonstrate it. The funding comes from school and teacher organizations. SEIU is on there because they represent some school personnel, and there's no major funding against this. Questions? Okay.
We're not going to talk about Measure 59 because it is an advisory motion only. So it is to have this, tell the state that we want them to tell this federal government to, actually I don't usually speak on this one, Dennis does, so you tell them, Dennis, you know better than I.
Well, actually, Marilyn, we're just trying to save time, so you can read about this and then vote. It's just advisory. Let's go on to something that actually counts. All right, 60. Oh yes, this always counts. Condom use in adult films. Currently, Cal OSHA requires adult film condom use. Los Angeles County also has a similar statute. If Prop 60 passes, then adult film producers will be responsible to that condoms are used. Anybody with a financial interest in the film is also liable for, which would include film distributors and agents. Then if somebody spots a violation, I guess they're sitting in a room watching porn in the name of good government, they can lodge a complaint with Cal OSHA, and if Cal OSHA does not act, then any California resident can sue for damages. Okay, next. The Yes people say that the current law requiring condom use is not being followed, and that this proposition would lead to a safer adult film industry. The No people say that Cal OSHA should be responsible for regulating the workplace, And to allow any resident to sue is much too broad a standing. Next. This, again, another initiative that's been put on by basically a single person, Michael Weinstein, who's head of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, put this on and is contributing $4 million to the campaign. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation is the largest supplier of AIDS healthcare and AIDS drugs in the nation. The no funding, fairly modest from some adult film producers. Let's see, Cal OSHA is responsible for enforcing these regulations. One of the things that Prop 61 people want to remedy is that it's very far down on Cal OSHA's lists of things to do. I think there's a number, like in the last couple of years, they've only issued infractions to about 4 film companies, and that in fact, the Prop 61 people are saying that 60. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Janet's trying to get us to hurry along here. In 60, they're basically depending on California residents, including themselves, to sue on their own behalf. It's enforceable because they're giving the right to any California resident to sue if they see a violation. Yes. Where, right, the videos are being produced. Did you want to clarify any more on that, Mickey? That is correct. It's places of work. Yeah, it has to do with the production of films.
Typically, the employee is the one who's complaining.
Typically, that would be the case, yes. Any other labor attorneys here? Okay.
Prop 61 deals with prescription drug costs, and you've probably seen all the ads for it. The state of California purchases drugs for Medi-Cal pay-for-service enrollees, for state employees, state retirees, prisoners, which is about 12% of California residents. The VA purchases drugs for 11 million military veterans nationally, and the purchasing power of the VA, of course, enables it to negotiate the lowest prices among government agencies. If Prop 61 passes, the state agencies purchasing drugs would not pay more than the prices offered to the VA. The legislative analyst says it is unknown how much could be saved because of different possible drug company actions. They might lower the prices, they might say, I'm not going to sell it anymore, or they might raise the price to the VA. The legislative analyst also says the prices of the VA pays to drug companies are often covered by confidentiality agreements, and California would be unable to match this unknown price if they couldn't find out what it was, and thereby creating uncertainty and enforcing this proposition should it pass. The yes people say drugs will cost less for people in state programs. The no people say, why should California tie itself to the VA price structure? And also that the effect of Prop 61 is unknown. Again, the yes funding comes from Michael Weinstein, his AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and a little bit from the California Nurses Association. And you can see who's vehemently against it. That would be the drug companies. Any questions? Yes?
I think the VA, like all the military branches, can negotiate privately. Nobody else can.
And that's part of the problem that they see, and that's why they have this.
Excuse me,
Oh, sorry.
is there any private prison systems here in California?
I don't know.
Oh.
This wouldn't deal with private prisons, though. This would only the state.
Does
Thank you. Anything else?
Okay, we're going to take 62 and 66 together. It has to do with the death penalty. The two propositions are basically in opposition to each other. If one succeeds, the other one is going to fail. Okay, currently California does have the death penalty. There are more than 700 on death row, and California has not executed anyone since 2006. If Prop 62 passes, the death penalty will be eliminated. The maximum penalty will be life without parole, and those on death row now will have their sentences converted to life without parole. The yes people say that the death penalty is ineffective as a deterrence. 19 states have no death penalty. No Western nation has a death penalty. The no, in combing all the no's, I didn't look at any of the how much money we would save and things like that. It seemed like much more of a moral question. And the strongest statement I could find was by a DA who said that the question is not deterrence but justice. The question way back there?
Do we know if life without parole really means without parole, or something in the fine print they actually can be paroled?
Let's see. It can always be changed by initiative if you have a couple of $1 million, but we would have to find somebody who's knowledgeable about the fine print. Okay, Beverly.
Yes. The question I have is that I've always heard.
Oftentimes in the arguments about the death penalty, the point is brought up about the possibility of putting to death an innocent person. I decided not to list any of those because the pro people say this is a danger, or the pro people say this is a danger. The no people say nobody in California has been ever executed who has been innocent. So I just left that to the side. Part of this is that we're not talking, I thought it's not necessary to talk about the death penalty. Everybody has a strong opinion about it. So we're just talking about the mechanics of this initiative. I would get connected with STAR, and what they want to do is speed up the resolution of appeals, because that's one of the things that's one of the reasons why we haven't executed people recently, among others. Currently, there's automatic appeals to the state Supreme Court. The whole appeal process between the state courts, federal courts, could take 15 to 25 years. Since the death penalty was reinstated in 1978, 15 people have been executed in California. 105 have died in prison. If 66 passes, they want to reduce the amount of time that's available for legal challenges. Right now, it's actually somewhat open-ended. Some of the challenges they would require to be filed within a year. Each appeal will have to be completed within 5 years, and that they have various programs to increase the number of attorneys who would be eligible to represent death penalty cases. The yes people say that victims need closure and justice, and that the death penalty is only applied to the worst murderers. The no people say that there's going to be increased cost in hiring and training all of these new appeals attorneys. There's actually no guarantee that things actually will speed up, and that the usual arguments against the death penalty also are there. And 66 gets less than 50%, then the death penalty will be abolished. And then if both get more than 50% of the vote, the one with the most votes will prevail. Yes, question.
Is there any?
Currently, there's people who are prohibited from possessing a firearm, certain felons in particular. We have background checks to buy a firearm, and in 2019, they're going to have background checks for purchasing ammunition. Basically, that background check is they're going to look to see if you're on this list of people who are prohibited from possessing a firearm, and if you are, then you're not allowed to buy ammunition for the weapon that you're not supposed to have. All right. If 63 passes, the court will direct probation officers to monitor felons who are prohibited from possessing firearms and to follow up to make sure that they've gotten rid of these firearms in an acceptable way, either by turning them in, giving them to a dealer who holds them for them. But right now, there isn't any follow-up like this. Second, the penalty for not reporting a stolen weapon will become an infraction or a misdemeanor. Right now, it's you just say, I lost it. So, there's no penalty for that. And third, stealing any weapon will become a felony. Right now, if you steal a gun that's worth less than $950, it's only a misdemeanor. So they're going to change that to a felony. And lastly, you will need a $50 permit to purchase ammunition. No, this is immediate. The last summer, the legislature and the governor passed a number of gun control measures, and one of them was the background check for purchasing ammunition. This would also require that same background check, and the proposition would just be moving this process up earlier. The legislative analysts say that it will probably be tens of millions of dollars in cost for administration of these background checks and such. The yes people say it closes loopholes in existing gun control legislation. The no people say that this is going to be a bureaucratic burden to law-abiding citizens who own firearms. The yes funding people, Pistol Association. I'm sorry, I have to make this editorial comment at this point, but these look like paltry numbers from the NRA. So 64, this actually caused a lot of stir at Canterbury Woods when I gave you the talk there. I'll mention that at the end. Currently, medical marijuana is legal in California. Recreational use of marijuana is not. Federal law says that it's illegal for any use. If Prop 64 passes, recreational use is legal at 21. Resentencing is possible. In other words, if you were convicted of a marijuana possession crime that would not be a crime now, that you could apply for resentencing to the extent of having your record expunged. Sales outlets will be regulated and taxed. There'll be a 15% excise tax on marijuana sales, and of course, the excise tax will be exempt from Prop 98 and go into a special fund. The yes people say that this proposition sets up a safe and legal system for recreational marijuana use, that local governments may add taxes and regulation of their own. I'm sure Delray Oaks is anxious to do that. And that decriminalizing marijuana will reduce the legal workload. The no people say that at this point, there's no objective DUI standard for impaired driving as there is with alcohol. that to be judged whether you're impaired or not is a judgment call by the arresting officer. That recreational marijuana puts tax revenue ahead of public health. And that the third argument against it is that California should wait another 2 to 4 years, that we should learn what is going on in Colorado and Washington and learn from their experience and what they've had to do to handle recreational marijuana. The yes funding, Sean Parker's there again, spending his Facebook millions. George Soros, if you follow initiatives and such, a very familiar name, hedge fund manager. And the Drug Policy Action Group, which is an advocacy group, has also thrown in money. The no funding that comes from one individual, Julie Schauer, who lives in Pennsylvania, but is basically a national anti-marijuana legalization activist and puts money into these campaigns. And an odd organization called the Smart Approaches to Marijuana. I went onto the website and looked at them, and I wondered where had all the hardliners gone. The Smart Approaches people are, because the smoking is the same regulation, Prop 65 and 67 together. This is about plastic bags, and the plastic bags they're talking about are single-use, carry-out plastic bags. In other words, when you go to the grocery store, the plastic bags that you put your produce in, that's exempt, and that will remain the same. The paper bags that they put your medications in also don't fall under this. It has to do with when you're at the checkout stand and they're putting in your purchases into these plastic bags. Those are the things that these propositions want to regulate. So the principal one is Prop 67. Prop 67 is a referendum. In other words, a law was passed and signed by the governor. This was SB 270 that banned these carry-out plastic bags in 2014, but the law was never implemented because actually the plastic bag manufacturers were all ready for this, and they put this referendum, or they qualified this referendum. So we're going to have this vote of the people before the SB 270 either gets implemented or rejected. If 67 passes, basically all the features of SB 270 will be implemented. It bans these single-use carry-out plastic bags at grocery stores, large pharmacies, liquor stores, and the stores, if you didn't bring your own bag, then they will sell you a paper bag for 10 cents, and the proceeds will stay with the merchant. One thing I should also add on here is that locales that had their own plastic bag bans in place at 2014, those are unchanged by this law. In other words, this applies to all the parts of California, which is about 60% of the residents that did not have plastic bag bans. About 40% of residents live in areas like PG and Monterey that have plastic bag bans. And the locales can keep their own local legislation, implement a law that has already been passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. Plastic bag initiative, but it is not contradictory to 67. Let's see, What it does is if it passes and the referendum passes and the stores have to charge you 10 cents for a paper bag, then instead of the merchant keeping the 10 cents, it goes into a special environmental fund. The environmental projects. The yes people on 65 say that grocery stores should not keep the proceeds of a mandated program, and that the proceeds should go to these environmental projects. Bags will be banned, and this 10 cents will go into the special environmental fund. So those are two of the situations. 67 has to pass, and then you have to look at whether 65 gets more or fewer votes than 67. Next. If 67, the ban, fails, gets less than 50% of the vote, then there's no ban. Stores in the affected areas are free to hand out free plastic bags, and